My brother truly shattered my world, then got my wife pregnant. Now he calls the $2 million, our parents left me our family money and demands his half. Growing up, my younger brother, Ryan, was always the apple of my mother's eye. And honestly, it wasn't about jealousy on my part, because he was clearly the favorite, not me. There was never a moment where I felt he had a reason to be envious. Mom, bless her heart, practically revolved around him. She'd whip up his favorite meals, handle his laundry, and even nudge me to help him with his school projects. The expectation was always that I, being family, would just step up and assist him, no questions asked. The funny thing is, I never got that same kind of attention or consideration. But I didn't really mind. I was a pretty independent kid. Maybe it was partly my fault, always meeting his needs without ever asking for anything back. He never showed up for me when I needed a hand, only popping up when he wanted something. I was the quiet, introverted type, happiest buried in a book, or just keeping to myself. Ryan, on the other hand, was loud, boisterous, and a bit rough around the edges. Just like our dad. I also have this thing where I'm pretty direct and honest, no sugarcoating. I think that might have put me in a bit of a negative light with Mom, because of how straightforward I was. This favoritism, it just made Ryan the family darling, and honestly, as a kid, I was fine with it. It only became a real issue when he started actively bullying me, poking fun at me for being different. He'd tease me about my height or the slightly crooked blue frames of my glasses. He'd even sneak into my room, snatch my private journal, read it, and then run to Mom, complaining about whatever I'd written. When I'd finally snap, yelling at him and trying to explain to our parents that he was invading my privacy, they'd just chuckle it off, saying it was no big deal. He did some truly awful things. One time, he nearly broke my glasses during a scuffle, and another, he actually put tiny gray pebbles in my breakfast cereal. Luckily, I spotted them before I could chip a tooth. When I told Mom, she'd just wave it away, saying, "Oh, that's just how brothers bond." Whenever we'd fight, Ryan would go straight for my weak spots. We went to the same school in Maple Creek, so he knew I was having a rough time with a few bullies there. Instead of having my back, he'd actually team up with them, calling me names like lanky loser or hairy beast and egging them on to hurt me, saying I was just a total failure. Another time, during some petty argument I can't even recall, he actually told me to end my life. Most insults I could shrug off, but that one cut deep, especially since I was quietly battling my own mental health issues at the time. I'm doing much better now, but hearing your own brother wish you dead, that was devastating. Dad was often working late, and Mom just didn't seem to care much. She even scolded me once, claiming it was my fault for bothering him. Things only got worse in high school. There was this horrifying incident where Ryan tried to light my hair on fire. And unbelievably, Mom actually defended him, saying he was just playing. Seriously, who plays like that? Thankfully, Dad finally stepped in, taking my side and pointing out the seriousness of what Ryan had done. He even threatened to call the police on him. That moment was a huge wake-up call for Ryan, who had never faced any real consequences before. He was genuinely stunned. Dad made it clear that enough was enough, and Ryan needed to start showing his older brother some respect. Later, Dad came into my room to talk. I honestly never expected his support because he always told Ryan how alike they were, which was true in many ways. But that night, Dad admitted he'd hoped for years that Ryan would grow up, but he was slowly realizing Ryan was just becoming a bully. Hearing that from my dad, it was incredibly validating, and I almost broke down. I poured out everything Ryan had done to me over the years, even mentioning the bullying at school. Dad was shocked by how much I'd quietly endured. The next day, he went to the principal, making sure the bullies were warned about serious repercussions if they continued. That evening, Dad enrolled me in mixed martial arts classes at our local gym. He told me I needed to man up and learn to defend myself. I know. A nerdy kid like me, learning to fight probably seemed ridiculous. But I was so focused. I managed my time well, balancing my studies with daily workouts. And those MMA classes completely transformed me, both physically and mentally. One afternoon, Ryan was back to his old tricks. He stole my allowance, money I'd earned and saved from helping around the house for weeks. He'd snuck into my room and swiped it. I caught him just as he was about to bike off with his friends. I demanded he give it back, but Ryan just sneered, saying all I could do was run to Dad for help. Something just snapped inside me. I don't know what came over me, but I punched him square in the face. He stumbled backward, stunned, and I quickly grabbed my money from his pocket before pushing him back down. Ryan started bawling, which, I admit, was pretty comical. But then Mom rushed out, all concerned, wanting to know what happened. When she found out I'd hit him, she was furious, scolding me and saying I should be a better role model for Ryan, who just seemed to relish seeing me get reprimanded. Mom even complained to Dad about my behavior, saying I needed to be controlled. Dad, looking grim, told us both to explain ourselves. I told him how Ryan had stolen the money I'd worked so hard for. Ryan, of course, tried to justify it, saying he needed the cash for a date and that, as his brother, I should just help him out. But Dad told Ryan he was lucky. I only punched him for stealing, because anyone else would have called the police. He went on to tell Ryan that he had no right to take other people's things without their permission. Ryan didn't like that one bit and threw a massive tantrum, probably hoping Mom would jump to his defense. But Dad stayed firm. When Ryan realized he wasn't going to get off tangent-free just because he'd hit him, he screamed how much he hated me, and stormed back to his room, locking himself in. After that incident, Ryan started keeping his distance. He finally seemed to grasp that he couldn't bully me anymore, and even Dad had stopped enabling his antics. For the first time in ages, I actually felt like we were equals. Even though he couldn't physically harm me, he still resorted to verbal jabs whenever our parents weren't around. His behavior got worse with age, becoming angrier and more irritable each year. If I tried to ask him something, he'd just ignore me, walking away and muttering insults like nerd or loser under his breath. If he needed to tell me something, he'd relay it through Mom instead of talking to me directly. When I asked her why Ryan couldn't just speak to me, she'd tell me to be more understanding. I honestly couldn't tell if it was just teenage angst or genuine hatred. Over time, his constant negativity became unbearable, and all I wanted was to move out and get away from him. I repeatedly asked Mom to set up a sit-down conversation for us to sort things out, but she always refused, claiming she didn't want to get involved. And if I asked her opinion on why Ryan treated me that way, she'd just brush off the question. Eventually, I left for Eastwood College, my dream university, on a full scholarship as a top student. Dad threw a party for me, and even Mom seemed genuinely proud. Ryan, though, stayed aloof, barely acknowledging my achievement. The day I left for college was a mix of exhilarating excitement for the future and a profound sense of relief to finally escape the toxic atmosphere of home. Those first few months at Eastwood were truly liberating. I made new friends, enjoyed my classes, and began building a life separate from the oppressive shadow of my childhood. The constant dread of Ryan's verbal attacks lifted, giving me a newfound sense of peace. During my second year, I met Chloe at a campus party through a friend. And we immediately hit it off. Coming from a traditional background, having children outside of marriage was a huge no-no. So, when we found out she was pregnant in our final year, we decided to get married right after graduation. Our wedding was a small, intimate, and incredibly joyful ceremony. Our parents were thrilled for us, and we truly cherished the celebration. In that moment, I genuinely believed Chloe was the love of my life. I'd always pictured a monogamous relationship, one woman to come home to and share my entire life with. Even though other women had shown interest over the years, I never pursued anything because I was genuinely happy and content in my marriage. Chloe was my dream girl, and I never wanted to hurt her. However, I later discovered 2 instances of infidelity in our marriage. One was a sporadic affair with her married colleague that went on for several years, and the other was a brief liaison with an old boyfriend during a trip to her hometown. Looking back, some might call me naive, and I can't completely disagree. Each time, after a period apart, I chose to forgive her. I desperately didn't want our child to grow up in a broken home, and I truly believed we could overcome these hurdles. The affair with her coworker happened when we were young, and I chalked it up to youthful mistakes and poor judgment. For a while, things seemed to improve, although I could never fully trust her again. I did my best to put my doubts aside, knowing that if I chose to forgive, I had to genuinely commit to a fresh start. It had been 4 years since her second betrayal, and I felt confident in my decision to give her another chance. Chloe seemed to have changed, and we were genuinely happy, planning our family's future together. Then, 3 months ago, my world shattered yet again. She revealed she'd been having a long-term affair and dropped the bomb that our son might not even be mine. Her words hit me like a ton of bricks, a suffocating mix of shock, betrayal, and utter disbelief. I struggled to comprehend the enormity of her confession. In a daze, I managed to ask why she'd kept such a monumental secret, and how she could have done something so devastating. Her reaction was cold, almost detached, as if she were completely removed from the pain she was causing me. Her vague answers left me with more questions than solutions. It was a surreal and profoundly painful moment, confronting the shattered trust and the crushing uncertainty about my own family. I kept pushing Chloe for the truth, because I felt I deserved to know the father of the child I'd been raising since birth. Finally, she admitted it was Ryan. My eyes must have widened in shock as I asked her what she meant. She explained that she and Ryan had become friendly when I'd introduced her to my family. She'd stayed with us from the Thanksgiving holidays through to New Year's. Ryan, who was usually so cold to me, was surprisingly warm and polite towards her, which, at the time, made me happy because I didn't want Chloe to feel unwelcome. Chloe, wanting to be accepted into my family, spent a lot of time with Mom whenever she could. She noticed the rift between Ryan and me and asked me about it. I opened up about our strained relationship, explaining that it might never be fixed because of his unresolved issues. Chloe seemed to understand but started including Ryan in our outing, hoping it would help us bond. Whenever we planned to watch a movie, she'd invite Ryan, and we'd end up watching whatever he picked. During this period, Ryan and I actually exchanged a few words, which was a huge improvement compared to his usual silent treatment. I remember Chloe and Ryan hanging out, playing video games together, but I honestly never thought much of it. Chloe told me that one day, Ryan opened up to her about his struggles in a recent breakup. Feeling vulnerable, he formed a friendship with her. She mentioned he'd harmlessly flirt with her when I wasn't around, and eventually, things escalated beyond her control. The thought of my wife and brother together made me physically ill. Chloe confessed she felt immense guilt afterward and ended things with him, which explained her sudden decision to go home instead of spending New Year's with me. Even though I tried to convince her to stay, she was adamant about leaving. When we met back at college after the holidays, she was her usual cheerful self, so I didn't question anything. 2 weeks later, we found out she was pregnant. Chloe admitted she didn't know if the child was mine or Ryan's, and with no way to prove it, she chose to stay with me, knowing I was the more dependable brother. That, apparently, was why we got married. My entire world felt like it was crashing down. The son I loved might not even be mine. I asked Chloe if she had been sleeping with Ryan recently, and she slowly nodded. She revealed they had always stayed in touch, because their chemistry was undeniable. They would sneak off to hotels, lying to me about working overtime. She even admitted that half of her supposed business trips were actually romantic getaways with him. I asked her why she married me if she wanted my brother, and Chloe said she didn't want to be the one to end our marriage. She saw me as a wonderful father to our son and decided to stay. In her words, she made a mistake and just didn't know when to stop. I told Chloe I was glad she finally told me the truth, but that I was packing up and leaving. She started crying, begging for forgiveness, expecting me to yell at her. Instead, I calmly packed my clothes. Chloe insisted that if I loved her, I should fight for her, and that mistakes happen in every marriage. When she realized I wasn't going to budge, she changed tactics, saying our son would be affected by a divorce and that children shouldn't be raised in broken homes. I gently reminded her that I might not even be the father, which only made her cry harder and accuse me of being cruel. It seemed like she genuinely believed nothing could make me want to leave the marriage. Maybe it was partly my fault for letting things slide in the past. While I did love her, it felt more like that love stemmed from the idea that we had a son together and had been with each other since college. Chloe kept insisting it wasn't too late to fix things, but I struggled to believe her. I had no patience left. Trust was completely shattered, and her words felt hollow. Even if I forgave her, I could never forget she slept with my brother. I've always believed in forgiving mistakes, because we're all flawed, but this was beyond acceptable limits. I left her crying on the doorstep and checked into a nearby hotel. The next morning, I drove straight over to my parents' place. The whole drive was a blur, my mind just replaying Chloe's words over and over. When I walked in, the shock on their faces was impossible to miss. As you'd expect, my mother's first instinct was to defend Ryan. She immediately started insisting that her boy could never do something like that to his own brother. It was predictable, but it still stung. Determined to show them the truth, I told them to just stay quiet for a minute. I pulled out my phone and asked them to just listen. I dialed Ryan's number, my heart pounding in my chest. When he answered, I didn't waste any time. I confronted him about the affair. At first, he flat out denied it, just like I knew he would, refusing to take any responsibility. But when I told him that Chloe had already confessed everything, his tone completely changed. He immediately started blaming her, calling her all sorts of names and claiming it wasn't his fault that women were drawn to him, even saying he was clearly the better-looking brother. I just scoffed at his sheer arrogance and thanked him for confirming the truth, knowing full well our parents had heard every single word. You could have heard a pin drop. Ryan went completely silent on the other end of the line, then started stammering, trying to backtrack and save face. My mother, still in shock, finally demanded an explanation from him. He stumbled through some pathetic attempt to justify his actions, blaming everyone but himself, desperately trying to shift all the blame back onto Chloe. I could see the conflict on my mother's face. The woman who had always protected her favorite son was now looking at him with a mix of crushing disappointment and anger. In that moment, I felt this strange wave of vindication wash over me. For years, I had put up with Ryan's torment. Now, the truth was out, and the roles were finally reversed. It was Ryan who was exposed, his actions laid bare for everyone to see. As Ryan's excuses faltered, my dad, who was usually so reserved, couldn't hide his disappointment any longer. He calmly asked me to hand him the phone. "Ryan," my father began, his voice heavy with a disappointment that was worse than any yelling could ever be. "What you've done isn't just a betrayal of your brother, it's a betrayal of this entire family. You slept with his wife and continued the affair even after they were married. Your actions have consequences, serious ones, and they've shattered the trust we had in you. I raised both of you to value family, loyalty, and basic decency. What you've shown today goes against everything I've ever tried to teach you." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. "Your complete disregard for your brother's feelings and the lack of respect for his marriage are unacceptable. You haven't just hurt him, you've torn apart the very fabric of this family. Your mother and I were partly to blame for what you've become, but we will not tolerate this behavior any longer. Starting today, you are cut off from the college fund I set up for you. You'll have to figure out how to pay your own university fees. I'm also done funding your lifestyle. You think sleeping with married women makes you a man, let's see how you manage without my money." Through all of this, I just stood there, completely composed. A part of me had wanted to scream at Ryan, but watching my dad handle it was the ultimate vindication. I had exposed his true character, and it was clear he had never seen this coming. My mother, despite hearing everything, still tried to make small excuses for him, but my father swiftly ended the call, shutting down any of Ryan's last-ditch attempts to explain himself. After he hung up, my mom walked over to me and gave me a hug. It had been such a long time since we'd had a moment like that. In that embrace, there was an unspoken understanding. A sense of support I hadn't felt from her in years. Amid all the chaos, she apologized for not believing me all this time. My 14-year-old self could never have imagined this moment being proven right and, finally, being held by my mother. Following that day, my dad helped me find a great lawyer to handle the divorce from Chloe. As expected, she and her legal team tried to play dirty, asking for a ton of alimony since I earned more than she did. But her affair, especially with my own brother, weighed heavily in my favor in court. We also did a paternity test, and the results confirmed what we all suspected. Ryan was indeed the father of the child, Leo. That news was incredibly painful, somehow even worse than finding out about the infidelity itself. I was just so furious that the son I had loved and raised as my own for years wasn't mine. But I was determined to stay strong. Chloe begged me to keep visiting Leo, arguing that he shouldn't be punished for our mistakes, but I just couldn't bring myself to see him. He was a constant, living reminder of Ryan, and I couldn't stand it. After the divorce was finalized, an incredible sense of freedom washed over me. I moved into my own bachelor pad in the city, and it felt surreal to be living alone. I'd married so young that I never really had the chance to experience true independence. But my naturally self-sufficient nature kicked in, and I quickly adapted to my new lifestyle. And I have to say, I really enjoyed it. About 2 weeks ago, my dad called me. He told me he was seriously considering changing his will because he didn't want to leave a single thing to Ryan. My dad is an incredibly stubborn man, and once he decided to cut Ryan out of his life, he meant it. Ryan had apparently tried reaching out to our parents, even showing up at their house begging for forgiveness, but they refused to let him in. Even my mom, who usually caved to Ryan's tantrums, seemed to be completely done with him, though I know it must have been the hardest for her. Ryan never once texted me to apologize for what he did, which just proved he didn't regret his actions. Only the consequences. Dad told me he planned to leave everything to me: his assets, retirement fund, and life insurance, which all came to nearly $2 million. He said he would leave Ryan a token amount of $1 in the will, just to make it clear it wasn't an oversight. The only condition was that if Dad passed away before Mom, she would continue living in their house, even though the ownership would transfer to me. I was completely fine with this, as I wanted to take care of my mom in her final years anyway. Somehow, Ryan found out about the will. Unable to get through to our parents, he called me yesterday, trying to patch things up. He explained how he was struggling with college and that ever since Chloe found out he was Leo's father, she'd been hounding him for child support. He said he had no money, was looking for part-time jobs, but couldn't find anything, and begged me to talk to our parents, to help him start fresh because he really needed my help. I just laughed right in his face. I told him I was completely done with him. I reminded him that he should have thought about the consequences before he decided to sleep with my wife and get her pregnant. He argued that I was being unfair, that Chloe was also to blame, and I agreed with him. I reminded him that I had already divorced her, making her his problem now. He had no right to call me and complain about her or the child they created. Those were the consequences of his own actions. Ryan started to raise his voice, but I cut him off, reminding him that he was no longer the golden child of the family, but the black sheep who had slept with his own brother's wife. At that moment, Ryan started to cry. He told me how everyone, our grandparents, our relatives, had turned against him. And while that was true, it was no longer my problem. I told him we were done and that he should never call me again, because I no longer considered him my brother. Since that call, I've replayed the conversation in my mind. Despite how much I despise him, I had never heard him cry like that, at least not since we were little kids. I won't lie, it did sting a bit to hear him so helpless. But I knew I couldn't give in. I later found out from my dad that it was, of course, my mother who had told Ryan about the will. I confronted her in front of Dad, and she broke down, saying I'd punished Ryan enough and that he'd learned his lesson. My dad told her in no uncertain terms that if she thought what Ryan did was forgivable, then he could no longer stay married to her, because he could never forgive such a betrayal. That threat silenced her for good. It's been about 5 months now. My relationship with my parents has actually improved a lot. Dad and I go golfing every weekend, and he treats me more like a friend than a son. My mom, though I know she misses Ryan, has kept her distance. The last I heard, from a cousin, was that Ryan had to drop out of college because he couldn't afford it. He and Chloe are living together now, and he's got a part-time job as a mechanic. Apparently, they're raising Leo together, which I guess is a good thing. I never bring up Ryan with my parents, and they don't either. As for me, I'm doing really well. I got a promotion at my job 2 months ago, so my salary has significantly improved. I haven't been dating anyone, as I feel I still need some time and space to heal. I've started going to therapy, and it's really helping. It's a slow process, but for the first time in a long time, I feel like I'm finally moving forward. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to subscribe to support the channel. Your support means the world to us.